Stop what you're doing. Because what I'm about to tell you is going to make you question everything you thought you knew about professional sports management. Yesterday, one of the most powerful voices in sports media did something I've never seen him do in 20 years of broadcasting. Stephen A. Smith didn't yell. He didn't perform. He sat down, removed his glasses, looked dead into the camera, and delivered what might be the most devastating 4-minute takedown in ESPN history. His target? Not a player who choked in the finals. Not a coach who lost the locker room. The commissioner of the WNBA. And here's where this story takes a turn so sharp, you'll need to replay this section twice just to make sure you heard me right. The WNBA, the same league that was hemorrhaging money for 2 decades, just formally threatened the only human being on earth who saved them from extinction. Caitlin Clark. They put it in writing. Official letterhead. Legal language. A formal warning. Now, before you assume this was about some scandal, some fight, some midnight arrest, or some locker room blow-up, let me stop you right there. There was no scandal. There was no violation. There was no conduct issue whatsoever. Caitlin Clark's crime? She signed a deal to talk about basketball on television. That's it. She agreed to appear on NBC, the same network that broadcasts WNBA games, as an analyst and commentator. And the league office responded like she just signed with a rival franchise in a competing country. I want you to sit with that for a moment, because the sheer insanity of this decision doesn't hit you all at once. It creeps up. It settles in. And then suddenly you're asking yourself, wait, did they really just do that? Yes, they did. And what Stephen A. Smith revealed about the internal chaos happening right now at WNBA headquarters is worse than you think. Much worse. Because this isn't just about Caitlin Clark anymore. This is about a league that's about to learn the hardest lesson in professional sports. You don't bite the hand that feeds you. You especially don't bite it when that hand is the only thing keeping your entire operation from collapsing into irrelevance. But Commissioner Kathy Engelbert? She bit anyway. And what happens next is going to reshape women's basketball forever. One way or another. Conflict of interest. Those were the 3 words that sent Stephen A. Smith over the edge. Those were the 3 words typed out on official league stationery, signed, sealed, and delivered to the most valuable asset women's basketball has ever seen. When Stephen A. read those words on First Take, the studio went silent. You could hear a pin drop. Because he didn't just read them. He dissected them. He held them up to the light and exposed them for exactly what they are. A lie. Let's look at this through the lens of sanity for just a second. The WNBA claims that Caitlin Clark appearing on NBC, talking about basketball, analyzing plays, keeping the sport relevant during the off-season, is a conflict of interest. But hold on. NBC is a partner of the WNBA. NBC is the network that just signed a massive, multi-billion-dollar rights agreement to broadcast professional basketball into millions of living rooms for the next decade. NBC is the reason player salaries are finally projected to go up. So let me get this straight. Caitlin Clark wants to go on the network that pays the WNBA's bills, to talk about the sport the WNBA plays, to an audience the WNBA desperately needs to reach. And the league calls that a violation? Stephen A. Smith leaned into the microphone and asked the question that every single person watching was thinking. Are you trying to destroy your own product? Because that's what this looks like. It doesn't look like governance. It doesn't look like rule enforcement. It looks like sabotage. Think about the precedent here. Draymond Green has a podcast and appears on TNT while actively playing for the Golden State Warriors. Tom Brady signed a massive broadcasting deal with Fox while he was still technically eligible to throw a football. Did the NBA send Draymond a warning? Did the NFL threaten Brady with a conflict of interest? No. They celebrated it. They amplified it. They understood that when your stars shine brighter, the entire league glows a little bit more. But the WNBA? They seemed terrified of the glow. They seemed paralyzed by the idea that one player might become bigger than the brand. And that brings us to the part of Stephen A.'s rant that the mainstream clips cut out. The part that makes your stomach turn. He pointed out that for years, WNBA players have been forced to go overseas during the off-season. They go to Turkey. They go to Russia. They go to China. They play in foreign leagues, risking injury, just to make a living wage because the WNBA couldn't pay them enough to stay home. The league never had a problem with that. They never called that a conflict of interest. But the moment Caitlin Clark finds a way to stay in America, stay on American television, and keep the conversation focused on women's basketball right here at home, suddenly the lawyers get involved. Suddenly it's a problem. Why? Stephen A. Smith knows why. And once you hear the real reason, the dark, uncomfortable truth lurking behind this decision, you'll understand that this has nothing to do with contracts or conflicts. It has everything to do with control. The league is scared. But they aren't scared of Caitlin Clark failing. They're terrified of what happens if she succeeds without their permission. And what Stephen A. exposed next about the specific timing of this warning. It proves this was personal. Let's talk about timing. Because in sports, in business, in politics, timing tells you everything you need to know about intent. And the timing of this formal warning? It's not suspicious. It's damning. Caitlin Clark's NBC deal was announced on a Tuesday morning. By Wednesday afternoon, the league office had already drafted the warning letter. Less than 36 hours. Think about that. In a league that takes months to negotiate basic collective bargaining agreements. In a league that spent years dragging its feet on charter flights. In a league that still hasn't figured out how to market half of its all-stars properly. They found time to mobilize an entire legal response in under 2 days. Stephen A. Smith caught this immediately. He leaned back in his chair, shook his head, and said something that sent chills down my spine. This wasn't reactive. This was ready. They were waiting for her to make a move. Let that sink in. The WNBA didn't scramble to respond to Caitlin Clark's deal. They had the response locked and loaded. They were watching. They were anticipating. And the moment she stepped outside the lines they'd drawn for her, lines she never agreed to, lines that don't exist for anyone else, they pulled the trigger. Now, why would they do that? Why would a struggling league dedicate precious resources to policing its biggest star instead of promoting her? Sources close to the situation have started painting a picture. And it's uglier than anyone wants to admit. According to multiple insiders, there's a faction within the WNBA's front office that has been uncomfortable with Caitlin Clark's rise since day one. Not because she's done anything wrong, but because she did everything right without their help. See, Caitlin Clark didn't come up through the traditional WNBA pipeline. She didn't spend years grinding in anonymity, waiting for the league to decide when to shine a spotlight on her. She built her own spotlight. At Iowa, she became the most watched player in college basketball history, men's or women's. She broke records that had stood for decades. She filled arenas that had never seen a women's game sell out. And she did it all on her own terms. By the time she entered the WNBA, she wasn't asking for permission. She was arriving with leverage. And there are people in that league office who have never forgiven her for it. Stephen A. Smith named it directly. He called it what it is, jealousy dressed up as governance. You've got people in that building, he said, who spent 20 years trying to make this league matter. And then this kid from Iowa comes in and does in 2 seasons what they couldn't do in 2 decades. And instead of thanking her, they resent her. The formal warning wasn't about protecting the league's interests. It was about reminding Caitlin Clark who's in charge. It was about sending a message. No matter how big you get, we still control you. But here's the problem with that strategy. Here's where this whole thing starts to backfire in ways the commissioner never anticipated. Because Caitlin Clark isn't just a player anymore. She's a brand. She's an industry. And the people who invested billions of dollars in that industry? They're watching this situation very, very closely. What NBC's executives said behind closed doors when they heard about the warning. It changes everything. When news of the WNBA's formal warning reached NBC's executive offices, the reaction wasn't confusion. It wasn't concern. It was disbelief. According to sources with direct knowledge of internal discussions at NBC Universal, senior executives held an emergency call within hours of the story breaking. And the tone of that call? Fury. One source described it this way: they couldn't understand how a league they just committed billions of dollars to could be this strategically incompetent. Think about NBC's position here. They just signed one of the largest media rights deals in women's sports history. They bet big, really big, on the WNBA's future. And a core part of that bet was Caitlin Clark. Not just as a player, as a media presence, as a face that could carry programming, drive ratings, and justify the astronomical investment they just made. The deal to bring Caitlin on as a broadcaster wasn't some random side project. It was strategic. It was calculated. It was designed to maximize NBC's return on investment by keeping the most marketable athlete in women's basketball visible year-round. Off-season programming, studio segments, pre-game analysis, halftime breakdowns. Caitlin Clark talking basketball on NBC meant eyeballs. It meant engagement. It meant advertising dollars. And then the WNBA, the league NBC just agreed to pay billions to broadcast, turned around and threatened their investment with a legal warning. Stephen A. Smith put it perfectly. You've got NBC writing checks to keep this league alive, and the commissioner is telling their star hire that she can't cash them. What planet are we living on? But here's where it gets even more explosive. NBC didn't just complain internally. They made calls. Multiple sources confirmed that NBC Universal executives reached out directly to WNBA leadership seeking clarification on the warning. They wanted to know, is this real? Are you actually trying to block this deal? And the response they received? Silence. No clarification. No walkback. No reassurance. Just nothing. That silence spoke louder than any press release ever could. Because in the business world, silence means one of two things. Either you don't have a good answer, or you're doubling down. And NBC's leadership interpreted it as the latter. Now, I want you to understand the gravity of what's happening here. The WNBA's entire financial future depends on media rights deals. Television money is the lifeblood of professional sports leagues. It's what pays salaries. It's what funds expansion. It's what separates a thriving league from a dying one. And right now, the WNBA is actively antagonizing the network that just committed to being their biggest financial partner. Over what? Over Caitlin Clark talking about basketball on TV. Stephen A. Smith asked the question that's now circulating through every executive office in sports media. If this is how the WNBA treats its partners, why would anyone want to do business with them? And that question isn't rhetorical. It's already being discussed in boardrooms at ESPN, Amazon, Apple, and every other major player in sports broadcasting. Because the next round of media rights negotiations is coming. And if the WNBA can't demonstrate basic competence, if they can't stop shooting themselves in the foot, those negotiations are going to look very different. But the fallout from this decision doesn't stop at the executive level. Because there's another group watching this situation unfold. A group that's been waiting for a moment like this. A group that's about to make the WNBA's nightmare even worse. The players. And what's happening inside WNBA locker rooms right now? It's the beginning of a revolt. For years, WNBA players have kept their frustrations private. They've smiled through interviews. They've posted supportive team content. They've towed the company line even when that line felt more like a noose. But this was the breaking point. Within hours of the Caitlin Clark warning becoming public, group chats across the league lit up like wildfire. And the messages weren't cautious. They weren't diplomatic. They were furious. One veteran player, whose name I can't reveal for obvious reasons, texted a group of fellow athletes a message that's now been shared with multiple media outlets. They warned CC for doing what we've been begging to do for years. Make money. Stay visible. Grow the sport. And they punished her for it. This league doesn't want us to win. Read that again. This league doesn't want us to win. That's not coming from a bitter bench warmer. That's coming from a respected veteran who's given over a decade of her career to the WNBA. And she's not alone. Stephen A. Smith referenced this growing unrest during his segment. He didn't name names, he's too smart for that, but he made it clear that his sources inside WNBA locker rooms were sending him a consistent message. The players are done being silent. And the timing of this couldn't be worse for Commissioner Engelbert. Because remember what Caitlin Clark's arrival actually did for this league. Before she showed up, WNBA players were flying commercial. Not private. Not charter. Commercial. They were crammed into middle seats on Southwest flights, hauling their own luggage, arriving exhausted for nationally televised games. It was embarrassing. It was dehumanizing. And the league did nothing about it for over 2 decades. Then Caitlin Clark entered the draft. Suddenly ratings exploded. Ticket sales skyrocketed. Sponsorship deals multiplied. And almost overnight, the league found money for charter flights. The same flights they claimed were financially impossible for 25 years. The players know this. They know exactly who made those charter flights possible. And now they're watching the league punish that same person for trying to expand her platform. One current player posted a cryptic message on social media just hours after the news broke. No names mentioned. No direct references. Just 3 words. Protect the ones who protect us. The basketball world understood immediately who she was talking about. And she wasn't the only one. Throughout the day, subtle messages of support flooded social media from WNBA athletes. Some were obvious. Some were coded. But all of them pointed in the same direction. The players are standing with Caitlin Clark. Against their own league. And that's a crisis Commissioner Engelbert never saw coming. Because here's the thing about professional athletes. They talk. They talk to agents. They talk to sponsors. They talk to media. And when the collective sentiment inside locker rooms turns against leadership, that sentiment doesn't stay contained. It leaks. It spreads. It becomes the story. Right now, the story isn't just about a formal warning anymore. It's about a league that's lost the trust of its own players. It's about a commissioner who's managed to unite her entire workforce against her. And Stephen A. Smith saw this coming from a mile away. During his rant, he issued a direct warning to the WNBA's leadership. A warning that's starting to look prophetic. "You're about to have a player revolt on your hands," he said. "And when that happens, no media rights deal in the world is going to save you." But the player backlash is only half of the equation. Because there's another group that's been watching this unfold. A group with even more power than the athletes. A group that could make this entire situation disappear tomorrow, or make it 100 times worse. The sponsors. And what they're considering right now. It would cripple the league overnight. Let me explain something about professional sports that most fans never think about. The games you watch, the highlights you share, the jerseys you buy, none of it matters without one thing: sponsor money. Sponsors are the invisible engine that powers everything. They pay for the broadcast. They fund the arenas. They subsidize the salaries. Without sponsors, professional sports leagues don't just struggle. They cease to exist. And right now, the WNBA sponsors are watching this Caitlin Clark situation with growing alarm. Not concern. Alarm. Because when companies invest millions of dollars into sponsoring a sports league, they're not just buying logo placement. They're buying association. They're buying the right to say, "We support this. We believe in this. This represents our brand values." And what does the WNBA represent right now? A league that punishes its biggest star for being successful. A league that threatens its most marketable asset for wanting to grow her platform. A league that seems more interested in control than progress. That's not an association sponsors want. That's a liability. Stephen A. Smith understood this immediately. During his segment, he posed a question that should terrify everyone in the WNBA's front office. If you're Nike, if you're Gatorade, if you're State Farm, are you comfortable watching this? Are you confident your investment is being handled by competent leadership? The answer, according to multiple sources close to major WNBA sponsors, is no. They're not comfortable. They're not confident. And some of them are considering drastic action. Here's what I can tell you without revealing specific names. At least 2 major WNBA sponsors have initiated internal discussions about their ongoing partnership with the league. These aren't casual conversations. These are formal reviews. They're pulling out contracts. They're examining exit clauses. They're running scenarios. Because for these companies, the calculus is simple. Caitlin Clark isn't just a basketball player. She's a marketing phenomenon. She moves products. She drives engagement. She reaches demographics that advertisers have struggled to connect with for decades. Young women, families, Midwest markets, casual sports fans. Caitlin Clark reaches all of them. And these sponsors aren't investing in the WNBA because they love basketball. They're investing because Caitlin Clark makes the WNBA valuable. So when the league turns around and punishes her, when they send formal warnings over television appearances that would only increase her visibility, sponsors start asking uncomfortable questions. Questions like, does this league understand its own value proposition? Questions like, are we backing the right horse here? Questions like, what happens if she leaves? And that last question? That's the one keeping WNBA executives up at night. Because Caitlin Clark has options. She has more options than any female basketball player in history. The NBC deal proves that. Major networks want her face on their programming. Sponsors want her attached to their products. International leagues would pay fortunes to have her play overseas. She doesn't need the WNBA. But the WNBA desperately needs her. And sponsors know this. They know that if Caitlin Clark ever decides she's had enough, if she decides the juice isn't worth the squeeze, the entire value proposition of women's professional basketball changes overnight. One source familiar with sponsor discussions put it bluntly. If Caitlin walks, half these deals get renegotiated. And not in the league's favor. Stephen A. Smith connected these dots on air. He looked into the camera and delivered a warning that should echo through every boardroom in the WNBA. You're not just risking her. You're risking everything she brought with her. And when the sponsors start doing the math, you're going to realize exactly how expensive this little power play really was. But here's the twist nobody saw coming. While sponsors deliberate and players revolt and executives panic, someone else has entered the conversation. Someone with deep pockets, a massive platform, and absolutely no patience for institutional incompetence. And what they're proposing, it could change women's basketball forever. For years, the WNBA has operated without real competition. Sure, there have been overseas leagues. There have been small-scale alternatives. There have been whispers and rumors about potential rivals. But nothing serious. Nothing that could actually threaten the WNBA's position as the only premier women's basketball league in America. That's about to change. Because the Caitlin Clark situation has attracted attention from people who've been waiting for exactly this moment. People with resources. People with vision. People who look at the WNBA's self-destructive behavior and see opportunity. Stephen A. Smith hinted at this during his segment. He didn't name names. He rarely does when the information is this sensitive, but he made something very clear. There are conversations happening right now that would make the WNBA's leadership very, very nervous. And those conversations involve creating something new. A competing league. Not a minor league. Not a developmental system. Not some side project. A legitimate, fully funded, professionally operated alternative to the WNBA. Now, I know what you're thinking. We've heard this before. Every few years, someone threatens to start a new women's basketball league. It never happens. And you're right. It never has happened. But here's what's different this time. First, the money is there. Private equity has flooded into women's sports over the past 2 years. Investment groups that ignored female athletics for decades are now scrambling to get in. They see the growth curves. They see the engagement metrics. They see a market that's been undervalued for too long. And they're ready to write checks. Big checks. Second, the talent pool is frustrated. Remember what I said about the locker room revolt? Those players aren't just angry about the Caitlin Clark situation. They're angry about years of being underpaid. Years of being disrespected. Years of watching the league mismanage opportunity after opportunity. If someone offered them a better deal, better salaries, better conditions, better treatment, many of them would listen. Third, and most importantly, there's now a face for the movement. Caitlin Clark. Any competing league that could sign Caitlin Clark wouldn't just be viable. It would be dangerous. It would immediately have the most marketable player in women's basketball. It would immediately have the attention of NBC, sponsors, and millions of fans. It would immediately become the center of the women's basketball universe. And the WNBA? They'd become an afterthought overnight. Stephen A. Smith laid out this scenario with brutal clarity. "You think Caitlin Clark needs you?" he asked, looking directly into the camera as if addressing Commissioner Engelbert personally. "She doesn't. She has options you can't even imagine. And if you keep pushing her, she's going to explore them. And when she does, you're going to watch everything you built walk out the door with her." Now, I want to be clear. There's no confirmation that Caitlin Clark is considering leaving the WNBA. There's no official announcement about a competing league launching. But the conversations are happening. The pieces are moving. And the WNBA's handling of this situation is accelerating a timeline that might have taken years under different circumstances. One source connected to major sports investors put it this way. 6 months ago, a competing women's basketball league was a hypothetical. A fun thing to discuss over drinks. Now, it's on the whiteboard. It's being modeled. It's being taken seriously. And here's the terrifying part for the WNBA. They can't stop it. They can't prevent investors from having meetings. They can't stop agents from fielding calls. They can't control what happens outside their walls. All they can do is watch and hope they haven't already pushed things too far. But based on what Stephen A. Smith revealed next, based on what's allegedly happening inside Commissioner Engelbert's office right now, it might already be too late. Because there's a reason this warning was issued so quickly. There's a reason the league moved with unprecedented speed. And when you understand the real motivation behind this decision, everything changes. Every decision has a reason. Sometimes that reason is logical. Sometimes it's strategic. Sometimes it's pure emotion. But there's always a reason. And the WNBA's decision to issue a formal warning to Caitlin Clark? The reason behind it has nothing to do with conflicts of interest. It has nothing to do with protecting league integrity. It has nothing to do with broadcast partnerships or contractual obligations. It's about one thing: power. Stephen A. Smith didn't just hint at this during his segment. He said it outright. "This is about control," he declared, his voice dropping to a level of seriousness I've rarely heard from him. "This is about a commissioner who watched her league get taken over by one player. And instead of embracing it, she resented it. Let me paint you a picture. Imagine you've spent your entire career climbing the ladder of sports administration. You've worked in boardrooms. You've navigated politics. You've sat through endless meetings about marketing strategies and revenue projections. And then one day you finally reach the top. You become commissioner. The ultimate title. The ultimate authority. The face of the entire league. Except, nobody's looking at your face. They're looking at her. Every interview request goes to Caitlin Clark. Every magazine cover features Caitlin Clark. Every viral moment, every trending topic, every water cooler conversation. Caitlin Clark, you're technically in charge. But she's the one with all the power. How does that feel? For some leaders, it would feel like success. It would feel like validation. It would prove that the league they oversee is thriving. But for others, it feels like a threat. Multiple sources with knowledge of internal WNBA dynamics have painted a troubling picture of Commissioner Engelbert's mindset over the past 18 months. They describe a leader who has grown increasingly uncomfortable with Caitlin Clark's influence. Not because Clark has done anything wrong, but because her mere existence highlights a painful truth. The WNBA's success isn't about leadership. It's about one player. And that reality has reportedly created deep insecurity within the commissioner's office. Stephen A. Smith addressed this head-on. You've got a commissioner who's supposed to be celebrating the greatest thing that ever happened to her league, he said. Instead, she's threatened by it. She's intimidated by it. And now she's trying to put it back in a box. The formal warning wasn't about NBC. It was about sending a message. A message that says, no matter how big you get, I'm still above you. A message that says, you work for this league, not the other way around. A message that says, know your place. But here's what Commissioner Engelbert doesn't understand. Here's what her advisors apparently failed to explain to her. You can't put Caitlin Clark in a box. She's too big. She's too valuable. She's too important. And the moment you try to contain her, you don't diminish her power. You reveal your own weakness. That's exactly what's happening right now. The formal warning didn't establish the commissioner's authority. It exposed her insecurity. It showed the entire sports world that the WNBA's leadership feels threatened by its own star player. And that's a devastating look. Because strong leaders don't punch down. Strong leaders don't attack the people who make them successful. Strong leaders celebrate excellence. They amplify talent. They create environments where greatness can flourish. Commissioner Engelbert did the opposite. And now she's facing consequences she never anticipated. Because there's one person who hasn't weighed in on this situation yet. One person whose response could determine everything. One person who's been remarkably silent while the entire sports world explodes around her. Caitlin Clark herself. And what she's reportedly planning to do next. It could end this entire controversy. Or it could burn the WNBA to the ground. In the 48 hours since this story broke, Caitlin Clark has said exactly 0 words publicly. No press conference. No social media statement. No interview requests accepted. Nothing. And that silence? It's deafening. See, most athletes in this situation would immediately go on the defensive. They'd release a carefully crafted statement through their publicist. They'd appear on a friendly podcast to share their side. They'd fight back in the court of public opinion. Caitlin Clark has done none of that. She's just quiet. And in the world of professional sports, that kind of silence is terrifying. Because silence means thinking. Silence means strategizing. Silence means she's not reacting emotionally, she's planning deliberately. Stephen A. Smith picked up on this immediately. You know what scares me if I'm the WNBA right now? He asked during his segment. It's not the backlash. It's not the sponsors. It's not even the players. It's the fact that Caitlin Clark hasn't said a single word. That tells me she's not panicking. She's calculating. And he's absolutely right. Caitlin Clark didn't become the most dominant force in women's basketball by being impulsive. She didn't shatter records and fill arenas by making emotional decisions. Everything she does is intentional. Every move is calculated. So when she goes silent in the middle of the biggest controversy of her professional career, it means she's working on something. Sources close to Clark's inner circle have offered small glimpses into what's happening behind closed doors. And what they're describing is fascinating. Apparently, Caitlin has been in constant communication with her team, agents, lawyers, advisors, since the moment the warning was issued. But she hasn't been asking them how to apologize. She hasn't been asking them how to smooth things over. She's been asking one question over and over. What are my options? That question should send chills down Commissioner Engelbert's spine. Because Caitlin Clark asking about her options isn't the behavior of someone who's scared. It's the behavior of someone who knows she has leverage. It's the behavior of someone who's realized that she holds more cards than the people trying to control her. Think about what those options might include. She could demand a public apology from the league office. She could refuse to participate in certain league-mandated events or promotional activities. She could make public statements that expose internal dysfunction. She could test the boundaries of her contract in ways the league never anticipated. Or, and this is the nuclear option, she could explore those competing league conversations that are already happening. She could take meetings. She could listen to pitches. She could let it be known, subtly or not so subtly, that her future in the WNBA is no longer guaranteed. The mere rumor of that would crater the league's value overnight. And Caitlin Clark knows it. That's why she's silent. She doesn't need to say anything right now. The silence itself is a weapon. Every day that passes without a statement from her is another day of uncertainty for the WNBA. Another day of sponsors asking questions. Another day of executives sweating. Another day of Commissioner Engelbert wondering if she just made the biggest mistake of her career. Stephen A. Smith captured this dynamic perfectly. Caitlin Clark doesn't have to do anything, he said. She just has to wait. And while she waits, the league is tearing itself apart. That's power. Real power. And they gave it to her by being stupid. But here's what makes this situation truly unprecedented. Caitlin Clark isn't just a basketball player with leverage. She's a cultural icon with a massive platform. And when she finally does break her silence, when she finally decides to speak, the entire world will be listening. Every word will be analyzed. Every sentence will be dissected. Every implication will be debated for weeks. And if she says the wrong thing, or the right thing depending on your perspective, it could fundamentally reshape women's professional basketball. The question isn't whether Caitlin Clark will respond. The question is how. And what I'm about to tell you, what sources are now suggesting about her potential response, could change everything we think we know about this situation. This is the moment everything has been building toward. The controversy, the backlash, the sponsor concerns, the player revolt, the competing league whispers, the commissioner's insecurity, Caitlin's calculated silence. All of it leads here. Because according to sources close to Caitlin Clark's team, a decision has been made. She's going to respond. But not the way anyone expected. Not with anger. Not with threats. Not with dramatic announcements about her future. She's going to do something far more devastating. She's going to ignore the warning entirely. She's going to honor her NBC contract. She's going to appear on national television talking about basketball, exactly as planned. And she's going to dare the WNBA to do something about it. Stephen A. Smith predicted this exact outcome during his segment. You watch, he said, pointing at the camera. Caitlin Clark is going to call their bluff. She's going to show up on NBC, smile at the camera, and act like that warning never existed. And then Commissioner Engelbert is going to have to decide, do I escalate this? Do I fine her? Do I suspend her? Or do I quietly back down and admit I made a mistake? It's a masterclass in leverage. By refusing to acknowledge the warning, by proceeding as if it never happened, Caitlin Clark forces the league into an impossible position. If they escalate, they become the villains. They become the league that punished their biggest star for talking about basketball on television. They become the laughingstock of professional sports. They become the cautionary tale that every future sports commissioner studies as an example of what not to do. But if they back down, they lose all credibility. They prove that their formal warning was empty posturing. They show the entire sports world that Caitlin Clark has more power than the commissioner's office. Either way, the WNBA loses. Either way, Caitlin Clark wins. And that's the genius of her response. She doesn't have to fight publicly. She doesn't have to engage in a war of words. She just has to keep being excellent. She just has to keep showing up. She just has to keep doing exactly what made her valuable in the first place. And the league? They have to sit there and watch. Stephen A. Smith ended his segment with words that will echo through the sports world for years to come. He leaned forward, looked directly into the camera, and delivered his verdict. Commissioner Engelbert, I'm going to say this as clearly as I possibly can. You made a mistake. A catastrophic, unforced, completely avoidable mistake. You had the greatest gift any sports league has ever received. A generational talent who actually wants to promote your product, and you treated her like an enemy. He paused, shaking his head slowly. You need to fix this. Not tomorrow. Not next week. No. Pick up the phone. Call Caitlin Clark. Apologize. Withdraw the warning. Do whatever it takes to make this right. Because if you don't, you're going to watch everything you've built crumble. And the worst part? You'll have no one to blame but yourself. The segment ended, but the impact is just beginning. Because here's what happens next. The warning stays or gets withdrawn. Caitlin Clark appears on NBC or she doesn't. Sponsors stay committed or they start walking. Players stay silent or they start speaking. And somewhere, in a boardroom we don't know about yet, investors continue drawing up plans for a world where the WNBA isn't the only option. This isn't just a sports story anymore. This is a case study in institutional arrogance. This is a lesson in how quickly power can shift when leadership loses touch with reality. This is a warning to every league, every commissioner, every executive who thinks they can control the uncontrollable. You can't contain greatness. You can only choose whether to be lifted by it or crushed beneath it. Commissioner Engelbert made her choice. Now she has to live with the consequences. And Caitlin Clark? She's going to keep doing what she's always done. She's going to keep winning. On the court, off the court, and in every room where decisions about her future are being made. Because at the end of the day, this was never really about a formal warning. It was about who controls the narrative of women's basketball. And now we know the answer. It's not the league. It's not the commissioner. It's her. It was always her. If this story made you think differently about the future of women's basketball, drop a comment below and let me know your thoughts. Do you think Commissioner Engelbert should resign? Do you think Caitlin Clark will stay in the WNBA long term? And do you think we'll see a competing league within the next 5 years? Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications because this story is far from over. When the next development breaks, and trust me, you'll want to hear about it here first. Until then, stay locked in. The future of women's basketball is being written right now, and you just watched history unfold.